All right, let's do part two of news, sports, traffic, and weather. So we're just continuing with lesson 46 of 84 for H Radio 223. Okay, so let's look at some questions that you have to ask yourself before you decide to put the bulletin together or to chase a story to see whether it is relevant or not. Okay, we decide. I mean, there's always news that's happening around us, and there's really like an infinite amount of sources and things that are happening, events, like whatever political situations that I can carry on and on. I'm not going to, because you know what I mean, right? But what would be the question that we ask ourselves to actually allow us to say this should make it to the editorial situation or section or segment within our newsroom itself, right? So a couple of questions that we would have to ask ourselves is it new? So remember I said to you, the word new is in news because it has to be something that is breaking, something that people do not know about, something that we've recreated or we have constructed from, let's say, ongoing news or long running news. Is it unusual in the way that it is, again, something interesting? Or is it significant? And is it about people? In other words, does it affect the people and also your listen demographic that you are chatting to, right? So when it marks all these little check boxes, then you can say, okay, cool. Like let's have a look further. So there's a little bit of an explanation for each of those. Let me quickly go through that. I think they're quite straightforward as well. So if it is not new, it can't be news, right? Is it unusual? It has been uncommon, so there has to be something different about it. It has to be odd or out of the ordinary. So not don't take the word odd literally. It has to just stand out as being quote unquote abnormal. So something that is new once again. If it's interesting, it's going to be important to the listener. So, in other words, we need to know whether, from a journalist's point of view, we are writing it and we're compiling it and we're sourcing it in a way that is relevant, once again, to the listener. If it is relevant, that means it is, like, by default interesting. Is it significant? So, in other words, does it have an impact on their lives? And the last one, and you can find this reference in Valerie's book. So Geller states that a news story should have characters and that people should be involved. So we can look at our presidents or our, let's say, our social workers or people that have, let's say, died in an accident, as I mentioned before, or it is stakeholders within an event, right, that would make this newsworthy. Let's ask a couple of questions. Does this story have a strongly defined subject? So the subject matter is quite clear. It's not kind of run of the mill. It's also not a little bit vague. We'd have to ask ourselves, is it new information and who cares whether or not we, let's say, report this as news? Would you have a conversation with someone else about it? So once again, these are questions that you would ask also when you are determining what type of content you want to put on your show, right? So things about like human emotion, money, safety, etc., things like that. And people that are at the center of a story, like, are we going to care about them? And not necessarily always in an endearing way, so like in a loving way, if we have politicians, for example, that are, at the center of a news story, does it strike some kind of emotion that we have a connection to the story and let's say have a reaction to these people that are making up the context of it? So this is from my textbook. So I said, there are again a couple of things that you also have to look at. How many people does the news story actually affect? So is it nationwide? Is it regional? Is it community? That type of thing. Is there a ripple effect that might have a reaction from the audience? Is it just shock factor? So the reach that it has, once again, whether the issue itself is long running, as I said, is there many parts or are there many parts or compartments to the story itself? Who is involved in the story and why did the story like come about, right? So in other words, where did it originate from? What were its factors that were, like let's say spark plugs or whatever it is, you sparked it off and I think you understand what I mean, right? Okay. There are a couple of other things that we also have to look at. So when we're looking at timing, you could see that mine and Valerie's kind of coincide here and there. So with timing, news means quite literally anything that is new, topics that are currently newsworthy, that they are, there's so much news, as I said just a little bit earlier, when we started this particular lecture, I said there's so much news that is out there, but a lot of people have consumed it already. They'll already know it. You're not going to go on air, especially where we know that radio is an immediate medium, so you can immediately construct a story and source a story and put it out there as breaking. Compared to, let's say, TV and print, we have a much bigger advantage as to kind of the current, I say the time that it is actually put out and the immediacy that we can actually share that with our audience. So significance, the number of people that is affected by the story. So if there's a plane crash, for example, and hundreds of people died in that, it is more significant, unfortunately, and I'm not putting that, let's say, a small accident on the highway that killed three people, it's a little bit more significant. We have to report on the plane crash and see its implications to how people will be affected by it emotionally. Perhaps families that were, affected by it are South African. We could have a war in another country, and we could be looking to, get our citizens that might be on a holiday there out of that country, things like that, that we'd have to have significance for also that relate back to our country, which is leads me to proximity, right? Okay, so stories that happen near us that have more significance close to home, the story is, the more newsworthy that it is. And its prominence, as a rule, famous people get more coverage. It's just quite as simple as that. So again, anyone that is of, I say, a quote unquote famous standard, so known, well known, between, I think anything between, two or more people that this person or specific person does not know means that you have accomplished the definition of fame, right? But we look at, let's say, obviously our high profile stars, etc., within different fields, to note that it is something that we might want to talk about, because again, their actions might also have a ripple effect on our lives. Okay. All right, a human interest story. So things like where we're going to end, as I mentioned before, in tail enders, human interest stories are something that might be good news or bad news. Often, it's like people that are gifted, houses, or for example, like The Rock, just I think he gave, yeah, a whole brand new house, but it's a massive house, to a Nigerian soccer player. I think it was a soccer player. Or it's a athlete, right? So that would be like a human interest story. Say the Rock, Dwayne Johnson, right? So that would be human interest, and it'd be a nice way to end, let's say, the news. It's a nice feel good story, and we definitely want to hear about things like that. People doing good things. And again, once again, there's a very famous star in there that's kind of reaching out, doing their thing. It doesn't really impact like the way that we live our lives every single day, but it's also very nice to hear. It is things like, for example, the release of the Barbie movie, and that it hit over $1 billion dollars nationwide, or worldwide, should I say, right? Things like that. Okay, Ingram and Henschel point out that there are two factors that journalists should consider before going out with a story. Namely, one, is it close? Again, is it the close, the proximity? So, is the same event happening in two different places? Can two very different news values be applied here? Or revolution in your country is bigger than news that is happening in a neighboring country, right? So again, that proximity factor that we factor in there, a personal impact. People understand and can identify with stories about other people, right? So if we mold our stories and can construct our stories, for example, if we are suffering from heightened tax laws, it affects everybody, right? Whether you are rich, poor, or let's say middle class, it doesn't really matter. But we might do an expose on, let's say, the middle class, right? A lower class citizen can relate to just the semantic of being, affected by that massive tax hike or inflation or whatever it is, right? Interest hikes, it doesn't matter. It'll affect us all. So personal impact, right? Okay, sourcing news. is about two things, right? How to get the news and where obviously it's going to come from. Remember that it's an implication as to where it is that you are thinking that you might not or might check that it is fake news. So whether it is opinionated, whether it's one-sided, whether you can back up your stories with, let's say, different sources, or you can, let's say, back up a statement that someone has called you and said, "Oh no, my house is, being burgled, and I think it is this person, or it is this person. I saw them and I witnessed them, and I'm describing or identifying them as this. I want to go do my police report or whatever it may be." I would have to go as a journalist and go and at least go find up some backup information that could, like, let's say, some related incidents in the area. I would go and, let's say, investigate a little bit more about these particular identified thieves, and I would put that in just to make sure that I am on the right track. Remember, it's about facts, facts, facts. We don't feed them any false information, right? So how to get news. Journalists are going to find that news comes from them instead of going out to actually look for it. So where the journalist will sit and say, okay, I see something, right? And I want to know more about a particular angle of this, or I want to investigate further. So the journalist will be the one that's the instigator of where they will take the action, or they will be active after that. So news journalists often repackage or sometimes pass on what they think might be interesting or relevant to even some other source of press, and another station. Sometimes, for example, within the SABC, will again have a news department. The news department will then go and filter and then also allocate different news that is more applicable to different types of stations. So I find a news story, but maybe I am thinking it's not really suited for five. It rather sits better on, let's say, Motsoeding FM, and I will go and I'll share that information, for example. Okay. So where does news come from? So different sources, different places that we can actually have a look at. We're sitting back, we're seeing ourselves saying, okay, look, so here we go. There are always, I mean, there's journalists that find themselves, that reveal themselves to the public. You've got to have a good database, good network of people that you have spoken to and connected with over, let's say, a large, let's say, period of time. Again, spokespeople, press, PR, etc., where you can say, okay, if I'm looking for something, I think I might actually call Chris. Chris actually works at the, municipality for, I don't know, Joburg South, or like East Rand or whatever it may be. And I can hear that there's a story there. I can see something is happening in the area. I'm going to call Chris. Chris will maybe give me a better lead, to somewhere else. And so we've got to obviously be able to build a database, update that database, and obviously maintain it and use it at the end of the day. This need not be a subject that somebody wants to keep secret, right? So news is something that we want to go and expose. Once again, many people have a story to tell, but they may not know how to write a media release. So you're going to go out there, and sometimes you might be the one that is assisting them on saying, okay, cool, like this might or is of relevance and is particularly important to the community. Let me assist you in being able to share your story. And it's part of a journalist's job to find these people and report their stories, right? So stories that are in the public interest and deserve to be published, and then such situations must be investigated fairly, but fearlessly. So don't take no for an answer. Rather be like, kind of picture like Lois Lane, that type of feel, where she might come off very annoying if you do watch her and how she pushes and pushes and pushes for a story. She will go, quote unquote, undercover or under false pretenses to be, I don't know, in a hospital or this that. I'm busy watching Superman Lois, so obviously I have this as a immediate reference. But we're looking at someone fictional that does actually represent quite a lot of what a journalist would be at their, at their exaggerated form, or in the exaggerated form, right? So it is about that, the whole thing about saying, okay, cool, like this is a bit of a dead end, is it? Or am I deciding that this might be a dead end right now because I don't want to search any further? Okay. So a couple of categories that you can have a look at. in with you're sitting at your news desk and saying, well, where should I perhaps look for sources or for inspiration, quote unquote, right? Conflicts that might be occurring between, let's say, parties, people, businesses, again, kind of that social development that is occurring around you or within the country, again, countries to country, disasters and tragedies. So once again, like bombings, natural disasters are applicable there. Tragedies like people dying within again accidents and when we had like pandemics and stuff like that, right? Progress and development, very good. Also, all of these are good. I'm not going to say good for all of them. So they all are good. Progress and development. So infrastructure, looking at education, things like that. Crime, money. So, monetary values in terms of our currencies, our commodities, banking, financial systems and infrastructures, the underdog. So we love the underdog story, someone that has definitely succeeded and definitely compelled themselves to succeed in and against circumstances that didn't maybe dictate that they would succeed and have a great story to tell. Religion definitely is a big one. Famous people, health, sex, weather, food and drink, entertainment, sport, and human interest. So all of the different factors that you can actually have a look at, and again be inspired to. Right? You're still saying, well, where would I find the stories? I mean, you can go to Reuters and stuff that they still exist. And see where you can be fed certain information. Once again, you can also again be an observer of the community around you, have conversations, watch the news, read the news, watch social media, and then go out and phone and chat and write. Okay, so writing and reporting for news in the news story, the listener should, in the first sentence, already have the lead. Okay, so we look at the inverted pyramid, which I'll show you a diagram of a little bit later in a slide that's coming up. Inverted pyramid of lead writing or news writing, right? So we want to start off with a lead, something that is the most important point of a news story. And other information can be heard later on in the story. We'll go from most important to least important. And it's really important to keep in mind that in radio broadcasting, the listeners are one, they listen passively, as I've mentioned before. And so we want to keep the stories short, let's say 4 to 5 sentences, 30 to 40 seconds on music or in music radio, on music radio, should I say, and then about, I'd say about 45 seconds to about 50 seconds, let's say, in talk radio, including, let's say, some sound bites or so. So the reality is that people are not intent listeners, are not active listeners. And again, the way that you structure your news bulletin must be simple with the very least possible technical jargon that you can use. Again, once again, do not use a number of numbers because it becomes confusing and kind of like like the listener's just hearing number after number and they're not quite sure as to whether that was a percentage or a stat or a whatever it is, right? So they're more likely just to hear rather than listen, if that makes sense. So again, it's a kind of that background consumption of that subconscious consumption, and they don't hang on every single word that you say. So the way that you do write has to have impact. Once again, short sentences, impactful words that you are using, not sensationalistic. That doesn't make things any more impactful in any way. Just give the facts and make it quick and make it short and make it once again impactful, right? And it's the first sentence of each interesting or item interests them immediately. They're going to quite naturally wander off, and that's maybe a little bit of reflection on your news writing, but definitely just human nature. Like if you don't keep me interested, then I'm just not going to listen, right? So this is why when writing news for radio, Ingram and Henshaw recommend a couple of points. Okay, so one is definitely sell the story to the casual reader or listener. As I said, keep it kind of common, a common man on the street, common man or woman on the streets. That kind of language that we are used to. Not so it is still colloquial language. It's still formal language, but it isn't that high colloquial language, right? So to bring across the main point of the story very quickly, so that even the listener that stops listening and they miss like a sentence or two still gets the gist of the story and they understand. that okay, well, I mean, that we're listening to the sports story, for example, but we know also one and who maybe scored the winning goal, that type of thing, right? So a couple, 2 points here. To achieve these objectives, a radio journalist must aim to apply the inverted pyramid, right? So within the textbook, so in my textbook, so a word on radio, I just drew the inverted pyramid from something that's a classic. This is a classic source. It's not my particular methodology or systematic approach to news writing. This is something that's well known across the world. All journalists use this, and this is kind of what it looks like, right? So you can actually see. So I'm just going to zoom in here, zoom just a little bit in this. I'm just going to go back and forth. This is on your textbook, as you can see, just a quick little snapshot of that. Okay, and here's an example of, let's say, how to write from most important to least important. Intro. Each subsequent paragraph contains less important information, and then we have a bit of a closer, kind of, so that also the listener feels that they have like closure, within that in that news story. Let's read the news story. President Cyril Ramaphosa announced in Parliament on Monday that government will fund the establishment of a South African space agency as a step toward modernizing the country, right? So ideally, I mean, that is one train of thought, right? It's quite a long sentence, but it's okay. There's one comma there. I did mention to you before that you do want to kind of avoid commas if you can. There aren't any acronyms in here. We are addressing the president in his full surname and name and surname, right? And then we can just reference him by his surname or just as the president speaks, right? Okay. So second most important fact, that was the lead. So this is the most important fact of the story, that is starting this new space agency. Second point is that the department, which will be known as SASA, is likely to cost 28 billion rand over the next 4 years, as floating launch pads for satellite-bearing rockets are set to be built off the coast. Ramaphosa promised that the new agency would create countless jobs and give young South Africans motivation to focus on STEM subjects at school. And so, a quote: "It is time to take South Africa into the space age," the president said. South Africa, or SASA, or rather, you see, there we go, rather, SASA will be our giant leap forward, lifting South Africans out of poverty through job creation. Promises, promises, promises. Let me keep quiet. Parliament will discuss the issue further next week, right? So all of these facts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? This altogether will constitute, like I say, 30 to 40 seconds. All important, most important to least important over here, right? As you see. And it is important for us to know that Parliament will be taking action on it. Their next, like I say, physical action will be to discuss what he has announced. And again, just semantics of understanding that, we do address the president's full name once again. SASA has been already used, the acronym has been already used out here, so we can use the acronym here. Okay, so South African Space Agency has been explained so that the listener isn't confused by the acronym used over here. And then, for example, you're going to say, about STEM. STEM is kind of is in this case like a very well-known acronym, and so everyone understands what STEM stands for, right? Okay. All right, and it's not really that important to the story itself. I'm saying to sit and explain the acronym of STEM itself, right? All right, but okay, let's go and see implementing. How do we implement this inverted pyramid, right? So we look at a story. For example, in your case, let's say you're going to do one as an example. I'm not sure there should be in the exercises, or maybe it is part of your assignment as well. You might write a new story. I can't really remember at this point. It's like 6 in the morning. But okay, so you would anyway want to do this. Doesn't matter whether it is part of your assignment. You want to go and try this for yourself. You, let's say, go to one of the news sources at this point because you don't have the resources to go and, let's say, construct a brand new, fresh story from just around in your community. It would be fun if you go and do that eventually, right? But let's go and let's say, for example, we'll look at something like that is available, let's say on IL, like I said, Times Live, Sunday Times, whatever it may be, right? So you would pull that and you would read that. And the way that we do write, the way that we write applies to all mediums. So for radio, TV, and let's say print, it still starts with, let's say, the inverted pyramid of news writing. It's still the lead, but the thing is that when you do, let's say, read print, for example, there's a much, it's a lot more, it's a lot more elaborate. They do, you know, they have the I say the advantage of including a lot more detail that is unnecessary and that we don't have time for in radio or on you know on air. The perfect intro or lead, according to Ingram and Henschel, says that the most newsworthy aspect of the story is short and relevant to the main story. It's grammatically simple. So, in other words, for example, let's say we want to talk about the fuel price. Okay, I've mentioned this. I'm not too sure whether it's in your textbooks, but I know it's in mine. So let's say don't start um with the actual gas price. Okay, so um by R1.93, your you know fuel will go up, or you know whatever it is. What am I actually looking at? Like unleaded, leaded. I don't know. I'm not. I don't know the difference between that and diesel. But yeah, gas. Anyway, right? Will go up on Monday at 12 o'clock in the evening, whatever at midnight, right? So you want to start and say like on tonight at 12 o'clock, you can expect a one rand 18 cents hike in the petrol price, for example, right? So that what happens is that the listener will, it doesn't matter that they don't really catch the Monday part, I suppose, or the tonight the tonight at 12, they kind of can assume that when they do hear that the petrol price is more important, right? So we make sure that we do buffer the beginning of a sentence with something that is maybe 2 or 3 words, right? That are not necessary to the information, saying the actual facts that the consumer or the listener, should I say, wants to consume or needs to consume, right? So we've got to be grammatically simple and also logical at the same time, able to create enough interest for the reader to read the rest of the story, and a suitable in style to the story. For example, if the story talks of a murder, then the story or the style, should I say, then the style should be serious, respectful, and measured. In let's say comparison to let's say a tail ender, which will be lighter. I'm not saying that you're going to again approach the story itself in a way that's kind of like childish or whatever it means. It means that the tone that you're setting for the story itself, the words that you'll use also are going to be carefully constructed to make sure that you obviously are definitely accentuating what is more important. Okay. So as I said before, the 6 questions that you do ask for the inverted pyramid and lead writing is who, what, where, when, how, why. Any one of these are abled enough, or a combination of them for you to start that news story. So who is it about? What is it about? Where exactly is it happening? When did it happen? How did the story come about? Why is the story happening? Okay. So let's look at a couple more points. Is the most newsworthy point included in the story? And that's really what you really have to understand. Again, part of that lead writing process. It has to be part of that beginning part of the story. Is it more than 20 words? If so, try and cut it down. Definitely put it in 2 sentences, rather put 6 sentences instead of 5. If you are forced to, or you know that you have to include like 6 facts about what it is that you want to report on. How are you using that active voice? In other words, active means the today, the new part in the news. Okay, so how are you making it current and factual, right? For today and the moment now that you are reporting that particular news story. Have you put the facts in the first sentence, right? Facts first. When we have an allegedly in the story, we want to be able to put that maybe second or third or anything less than the first, right? is it up to date? So is it new and how current? Have you gone to go and then update that story throughout, let's say, the 3 hours that you might be reporting with a particular show, or maybe the 6 hours you're reporting with a particular station? Are the verbs in the correct tense? Okay, in other words, is the action taking place right now? Has it taken place already? Or is it going to still happen? Right. Make sure that your tenses are correct so that, again, the information that you are sharing is correct. So, once again, some steps, okay, on how you can write the remainder of the bulletin. So, once you got your lead, right, step one is adjust the language to ensure that is one clear, simple, and concise. Once again, review because that'll fill out the rest of the story. Ensure that you are including the five W's and the H in the story. So, if you started with a how, finish up with a why, what, when, where, and what's the other one? Where, what, who, and the who, right? And the who, right? Right. Okay. Never repeat the information given in the intro or the lead. It's already done, and we don't want to do that. And that's, I think, self-explanatory. I know, and I think I know, right? Step four: if the lead does not grab the listener's attention, then the story will fall flat. So most of the time spent in the story is spent on getting the lead right. Okay, so again, to get the attention, to get the correct, the most important fact, and to obviously, and you'll see this in an execution that I just wrote the news at the end of this particular lesson, so you can see an example of that and go through it yourself as well. I'll go through one story with you. Okay. Radio news stories are typically 100 to 300 words long, depending on how many other stories you want to write in the bulletin. So ideally, let's say 5 stories are a good estimate, right? Read the story out loud so that you have an estimation of how long it might take you to do it on air. You'll practice once again up to 8 to 10 times before you do go on air and actually present that without any mistakes. You've got all the accents, accentuations right. Again, the I say the pronunciation, enunciation, also correct, right? And I say there about 100 words are equal to approximately 30 seconds of airtime. What's the sixth step? Write the conclusion, so the end of the story, something that gives us closure, once again, as we've seen in the example in the textbook. Step seven, check the whole story over again and read it again out loud. When you write something, it might not sound as great as it should be when you do read it out loud. You might have to then go and restructure that or again rewrite a particular line because it is a bit kind of vague or it's a bit messy or whatever it may be, right? Step eight, fact check the script again and review the grammar, right? All right, so the first thing that a copy editor or senior member of the newsroom staff will spot is if there are any language errors, right? And you also can't come across as someone that doesn't know how to spell. Well, I mean, grammatically, that's the big. Grammatically and semantics of language are very important, of utmost importance, right? As a skill, as a journalist or a broadcast journalist in this case, right? So repetition is the most common error that we make within radio news. Please don't repeat yourself. Once again, I've repeated myself in this lesson, but that's okay because we're not doing a news lesson, right? I mean, like it's not a bulletin, it's a lesson. Avoid commas. So only because it's really hard to breathe, rather just turn them into full stops and longer, like a slightly longer bulletin. All copies should be typed, definitely not written out, and it should be double spaced so that you can actually read clearly. Date the first page in the script, include page numbers, write out the abbreviations, and definitely also the way that things are pronounced. If let's say it is a person's surname that is from, let's say, the I don't know, I was going to say Slovakia. They have quite difficult names there as well. But all across the country and all across the world, we have quite we have pronunciation. I say obstacles, they are barriers. So if you don't know, once again, go on YouTube rather and just play the pronunciation so you can get it correct. Otherwise, just ask someone in the newsroom around you. Maybe they might know. Okay. Underline the text for emphasis and use dashes for long pauses. Avoid technical terms or jargon that will go over the heads of the public. Check the facts. Once again, journalists' credibilities are at stake. You must limit the number of figures, as I've mentioned before. You must use the active voice, write in the present tense, be objective in your writing, so don't take sides. quote unquote, right? Right? Not subjective. Never plagiarize. So you're going to rewrite what you hear or what you see, should I say, what you read. Um, don't copy words from a press release verbatim, for example, right? So paint a picture that someone can imagine in their mind, just like we always do. Theater of the mind in radio is very important. Okay. And then you can go through the key lecture points that are there. So here's an example. Okay. I'm going to just go through there. I say there, at 8 o'clock, news and sports updates. I say in your news at 8 o'clock, illegal miners have been arrested by the Johannesburg Metro Police, and a bill to pass police reform in the US, spurred by the death of George Floyd, has collapsed. With your BMH News, I'm Chris Jordan. Good morning. And I pause and I do my first story, right? So for suspected illegal miners, sorry, um, I'm reading it as a FOR, not FOUR. Four suspected illegal miners have been arrested after a shootout with police and Johannesburg Metro Police Department and the Metro. So there's a little bit of an error. Let's quickly just fix that there. And the So after a shootout with police and the Joburg Metro Police Department, or the JMPD officers in Sloverville outside Dobsonville in Soweto, right? The officers had been in the area, so had been, can you see the tents there? Had been in the area on Wednesday, right? Investigating the murder of two people when they were shot at about 20 illegal miners, at by about 20 illegal miners. So no one has been reported injured. After the shootout, police found a monkey believed to have been used by the illegal miners in rituals, the four-faced murder and the four-face murder and attempted murder charges. All right, so from most important to least important. How many facts here? We got one here. We got two, three, and we have 4 and 5. Okay, so that works out well. I go moving further afield to go to, let's say, international news. I'm just gonna read. Let's read the George Floyd story. A bipartisan effort spurred by the death of George Floyd to pass a police reform bill in Congress has collapsed. So you see, so just take a little bit of a breath, go in there. So this is in accordance to U.S. lawmakers on Wednesday, which has resulted in a setback for President Joe Biden. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act was approved by the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives in March. We'll stop. Democratic and Republican senators have been seeking to hammer out a compromise and bring out the bill to the floor of the Senate for a vote, but they said on Wednesday that they have given up. The failure of the negotiations is a blow to Biden, who was elected in 2020 with strong African American support and has pledged to make police reform a priority of his administration. Ben Crump, a lawyer for the Floyd family, expressed extreme disappointment. Crump said, I think I put it there. Okay, in the last year and a half, we have witnessed hundreds of thousands of Americans using lawmakers to bring desperately needed change to policing in this country so there can be greater accountability, transparency, and ultimately trust in policing, Crump said. Yeah. So you'll see that then I end with a tail end about Britney Spears and the movie. I go into the financial indicators that are there. The rand is trading at 14 rand 67, not dot, no, not dot dot. So the rand is trading at 14 rand 67 cents to the US dollar, 17 rand 19 cents to the euro, and 20 rand 11 cents to the pound sterling. Gold is trading at $1,733.50 per fine ounce, and a barrel of Brent crude oil will cost you $76.19. Right, in your weather, the capital of Pretoria will reach a high of 26 degrees, and Joburg at 24 degrees today. Then looking at your traffic, there is a stationary vehicle, so fix that over there, vehicle, Chris, right? 800 meters after the Deep Cliff off ramp from the N1 southbound and the Rancho interchange. The left shoulder has been blocked off. Alternative routes are clear along the R50 for 553 south. And finally, the Springbok rugby team is to avoid British quarantine with a France stopover before their 3 test matches, more at 8:30. And then you'll see I include the sports bulletin, right? Just here. So let's say at half past, we go and do the headlines, right? The financial indicators, the weather once again, and the traffic, and then we'll do the full sports bulletin. Here I speak about cricket. I think this one right here is the rugby first, right? As I said in the top story. This is the cricket, and then that is for the Premiership or Premier League, right? Which is also very important to pretty much everyone because sport, I mean, soccer, football is the most followed slash supported um, slash fanatical sport in the world. Okay, all right, great. So that is that for this lesson. I've learned something, and I will see you on the next one. Let me stop it right there.